Hi, my name is Isabel, and I've always been the quiet one, the agreeable one, the one people forget to introduce at parties or leave out of family photos. But what if I told you my own sister once poured something into my tea, smiled sweetly, and told me, "This will help you sleep better"? What if I believed her? I didn't drink it. She did. And when she collapsed, gasping for air, that's when everything unraveled. Secrets, lies, even my father's will. They say family protects you. But what if the people closest to you are the ones quietly erasing you? Would you see it in time? Or would you only realize when it's almost too late? It was the kind of cold that clung to your skin, Vermont's version of hospitality in late November. The driveway crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the front steps of my childhood home. The house hadn't changed much. Same pale blue siding, same wind chimes that tinkled like brittle bones. But the feeling inside me, walking up to that door, wasn't the same, not anymore. I paused before knocking. Just for a second. A brief inhale. This door had always felt like a wall. When I was 12, I stood here holding a spelling bee ribbon, heart pounding, waiting for someone to say they were proud. No one had opened the door that day. I let myself in then, just like now. Sable was first to greet me, arms out, perfume overwhelming, smile plastic as ever. "Izzy, you made it! Look at you, still so tiny." Her tone carried that trademark condescension, compliment coated in a slap. "Hey Sable," I said, brushing a snowflake from my coat sleeve. "You look very prepared." "I always am," she replied smoothly, stepping aside to let me in. Her heels clicked like punctuation on the polished floor. "Everyone's in the dining room. Mom's waiting." The house smelled like nutmeg and burned expectations. Marcella, our mother, sat in her usual spot near the window. Her hug was brief, stiff, perfunctory. She patted my back like I was a guest, not her daughter. "You didn't have to drive all the way, Isabel," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I wanted to." "You always say that," she replied, turning to rearrange the napkins on the table. 4 places were set, just 4. Sable returned from the kitchen with a pot of her so-called signature tea, steam rising like secrets. "You've looked tired lately," she said, pouring it into a floral cup. "This'll help you sleep like a baby. I swear by it." I looked down at the amber liquid, smelled citrus, something else, bitter, faint, but there. My gut tensed. "I'm fine, really," I started, but she was already sliding the cup toward me. "Come on, Izzy, just try it." Everyone was watching, or rather, pretending not to. So I smiled, lifted the cup, and didn't drink. Dinner moved forward like theater. We passed dishes, shared old stories. Sable directed the rhythm, and we all played along. Until she cleared her throat with the kind of smug certainty that always preceded a speech. "I wanted to let everyone know," she began, lifting her wine glass. "I'll be taking the reins on Mom's estate planning this year. Also, I'll organize the holiday schedule. Isabel's got so much going on. I'll handle it." Forks clinked. A few polite nods followed. Even Marcella gave a small smile. No one looked at me. I opened my mouth. "Actually—" "That's best, dear," Mom cut in. "Let Sable handle it. You've never liked the logistics." Logistics. That's what she called the very heart of our family. The decisions. The control. I swallowed what felt like gravel. Dessert came. Coffee. Conversations about real estate, someone's new Tesla, an overachieving nephew in Florida. Eventually, I excused myself and went upstairs to the guest bathroom. Closed the door, leaned against the sink. My reflection stared back with dull eyes. My hand trembled slightly as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the cup I'd carried with me. The one Sable poured. Still full, untouched. I didn't know for sure. But something in me, a voice long silenced, whispered, "Don't drink it. Not this time." From the hallway, I caught a glimpse of her. Sable, watching me from the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing. A flicker of a smile on her lips. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just tea. It was a test. The next morning, I stood barefoot in my kitchen, the steam from the kettle curling into the quiet. I hadn't touched the tea from last night. It was still sealed in a small thermos I brought home, tucked into my bag like evidence. It sat now on the counter, untouched, watching me as if it had something to say. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had almost happened. That I had leaned too close to a cliff but stepped back just in time. I walked over to the small metal file cabinet by the pantry, my paper vault, I always joked. It held every lease, tax receipt, and document I didn't trust the cloud with. I pulled open the bottom drawer and flipped through the manila folders until I found the one labeled Estate, Emergency Authority. The papers inside were crisp, too crisp for how long they'd supposedly been there. My hand stilled on the page titled Temporary Financial Delegation. My signature was on it. I sat down at the kitchen table, heart knocking like a warning. And it wasn't the act of signing that rattled me, it was the absence of memory around it. I didn't remember agreeing to this. I didn't remember sitting down to read it. And yet, there was my name, written in my own handwriting, across a line that handed over legal access to my accounts during times of duress or emotional instability, per the wording in the fine print. That phrase, I knew where it came from. 1 year ago, Sable had visited me just to check in, she'd said. She brought wine and what she called a relaxing tonic. The wine was her favorite, a rich Merlot with a crimson label. The tonic was in a little glass bottle, handwritten in permanent marker. Rest mix. We sat on my couch, fireplace flickering, her voice soothing. Izzy, you've been through so much. Dad's death hit you hard. Mom's leaning on you too much. Just relax tonight. Let me take care of things. I remember laughing, a little embarrassed by how easily I drank what she poured. It tasted floral. A little too sweet. What came after was hazy. The TV was on. I think we watched something, or maybe just talked. At some point, I remember lying down on the couch. She pulled the blanket over me, told me to rest, that she'd clean up and let herself out. The next morning, I found a sticky note on my kitchen island. Signed everything we discussed, just temporary, trust me, S. At the time, I chalked it up to a conversation I'd simply forgotten. I didn't think twice. I didn't think at all. Now, sitting at my kitchen table a year later with the tea still sealed beside me, I felt the weight of every detail I'd brushed off. This wasn't an accident. This was a plan. I called the bank. Not customer service. I went straight to legal support, a number I found buried in the fine print of the estate agreement. I told them I was confirming the status of a financial delegation document dated last year. They asked for identification, verified my account, then went silent for a few moments. Yes, Ms. Faylith, the woman said, voice neutral. That delegation is still active. It was extended for another 12 months this past July. Extended? I asked, my voice too steady to sound normal. Correct. It was renewed via digital authorization from the original delegate, Sable Wren. I didn't approve that. There was a pause. Ms. Wren holds secondary authority, and with medical validation provided, medical validation? It was a note submitted from a family practitioner citing emotional distress and cognitive fog following your father's passing. I didn't say another word. Just thanked her, hung up, and sat in the silence that filled the apartment like smoke. She'd used my grief, my vulnerability, my trust, and worse, she'd weaponized my silence. I rose from the table and walked slowly to the window. Outside, snow was just starting to fall, powdering the edges of the sidewalk like sugar dust. I pressed my fingertips to the glass. No more pretending. I pulled out my phone and began photographing every page in the file folder. I opened a new document, started cataloging dates, names, and annotations. I placed the untouched tea into a sealable bag and stored it in the freezer. I didn't know exactly what she had laced it with yet, but I wasn't going to let it disappear. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the pharmacy under the guise of picking up vitamins. I asked about the ingredients in a popular sleep blend. The pharmacist explained, casually mentioning one compound that sounded familiar. Barbitol, used in high concentrations for sedation. I nodded, took the pamphlet, and left. Back home, I wrote a single sentence on a fresh sheet of paper. The pattern starts with care and ends with control. I'd seen it now, in the wine, in the tea, in the ink of a signature I didn't remember writing. But this time I'd remember everything. By the time I pulled into the driveway again, the sun had settled lower behind the pines, casting long, thin shadows across the porch. The cold had crept in sharper than the day before, biting through the sleeves of my coat even before I reached the front door. This time, I didn't hesitate. I rang the bell and pushed the door open with the familiarity of someone who knew they'd never quite be welcome. "Izzy?" My mother's voice called from the kitchen, flat and absent of any warmth. "Is that you?" I stepped in, brushing snow off my shoulders. "It's me, Mom. I brought those lilies you like, for the living room." "Oh," she replied, half distracted. "That's thoughtful." Marcella's tone wasn't unkind. It was worse than that. It was neutral. Polite. The tone you reserve for someone you see at the post office but can't quite place. I slipped off my gloves and made my way to the kitchen, the flowers bundled in one arm. Sable stood at the island, arranging a charcuterie board like she was auditioning for a cooking show. She glanced up and offered that rehearsed smile I'd known since we were kids. "Well, well," she said, tapping a cheese knife against the cutting board. "Twice in 1 week." "You're spoiling us." "I needed to get out of the house," I lied easily, placing the flowers in the sink. "Figured I'd stop by and say hello." Sable handed me a mug without asking. Steam rose lazily from the top. The smell was familiar. Too familiar. "I made ginger and honey this time," she said, watching me over the rim of her own cup. "You look like you could use it." I gave her a nod, but made no move to sip. Marcella joined us at the table, her cardigan buttoned all the way to her throat, hands wrapped around her mug like a fragile bird. "Sable told me you've been under stress," she said. "Work, estate stuff. You've always been a little too sensitive for this kind of responsibility." There it was. "Sensitive?" I echoed, seating myself across from them. "You take things personally, Izzy. Always have." Sable's voice was smooth, as if she were complimenting me for being creative. "Maybe I just pay attention," I said quietly. Sable's brows lifted just slightly, and I knew I'd scored a hit. She changed the subject fast. "You know, Mom and I were talking about updating the gallery wall. It was getting dusty." The gallery wall. My stomach tightened. "Come see," Sable said, rising. "It looks much better now." I followed her into the living room, already feeling a twist in my chest. The photos had been rearranged, neatly, tastefully, like everything else Sable touched. But one was missing. My high school graduation photo, the one Dad insisted we frame together, the one where he stood behind me with his hands on my shoulders, was gone. In its place, a glossy 8x10 of Sable, beaming behind a podium at some fundraiser. Marcella lingered behind us. "The old frame was cracked," she offered, her voice trailing off. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sable tilted her head. "It didn't really fit with the updated look. That photo of you was, 20 years old?" "Right," I murmured. "Not much relevance now." She smiled again. "Glad you understand." I didn't, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of watching me react. After an awkward silence, I excused myself to the bathroom. I needed space. I needed to breathe. Inside, I locked the door and leaned over the sink, cold porcelain grounding me. I didn't cry. Not anymore. There was a time I would have let it tear me apart, maybe even asked why. Now I just observed, noted, catalogued. On my way back out, I paused near the hallway leading to the den. The door to my father's home office was shut tight, locked as always. I stepped closer, pressing my palm against the wood. What was in there that I wasn't meant to see? What had he left behind that no one wanted me to find? I was interrupted by voices drifting in from the kitchen. "She just can't let things go," Sable was saying. "It's always something with her, always this need to be validated." "She's not built for this world," Marcella replied. "She was Dad's soft spot, That's why she's so helpless now. My breath hitched, but I kept listening. She's harmless, Sable added, as long as she stays in her lane. I left the hallway then, made my way quietly back toward the front of the house. I didn't need to hear more. I'd heard this story before, just never spoken out loud. As I reached the door, I glanced once more at the gallery wall. In a flash, I was back at that charity gala 5 years ago. The room had been full of donors, all dressed in shimmering black and deep navy. My mother had introduced Sable to the room with glowing praise. She's the future of this family. Then, as an afterthought, and this is Isabel, our artist. She prefers to stay out of the spotlight. A man I didn't know had smiled at me and said, "She's the pretty placeholder, huh?" Sable had laughed, clinked glasses, and replied, "That's okay. Some of us were made to be seen, not heard." And I had smiled too. I'd smiled because it was easier than explaining the ache, easier than challenging her with everyone watching. But that ache had never left. It lived under my skin, pressed into the corners of my memory. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing snow against the window panes. I zipped my coat, wrapped the scarf tighter around my neck, and slipped out the door without a word. No one noticed. Before I left the driveway, I turned back for a second. Just long enough to look at that house, not as a home, but as a stage, one where the cast had already been assigned and I'd been cut from the script without ceremony. "They're erasing me," I whispered into the still air. But they forgot I learned how to write. I didn't go home right away. After leaving my mother's house that afternoon, I drove aimlessly through the back roads of Burlington. Snowflakes drifted against the windshield in a soft, steady rhythm, like the ticking of a clock counting down something I couldn't name. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sky had dimmed to a deep slate gray, and the streetlights had begun to flicker on, casting long, lonely shadows on the sidewalk. Inside, the heat kicked on with a low, mechanical hum. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and set the grocery bag down on the counter. I hadn't even picked up anything useful, just a carton of milk and a box of chamomile tea I knew I wouldn't drink. I didn't bother changing out of my coat. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my phone, and opened the gallery. There it was, the photo of the tea Sable had handed me, the signature on the delegation document, the scanned copy of the notarized form I never remembered signing. Proof. Pieces. But pieces weren't enough anymore. I scrolled through old texts from Sable, rereading them like clues I had missed the first time. Her language was always so gentle. "Just looking out for you. Wanted to take something off your plate. You've always been so sensitive." That word again. My mind replayed her tone at dinner, the half smirk when I didn't drink the tea, the way Mom had nodded along without hesitation, and then that gallery wall, my picture, gone, replaced. I stared at the tea photo a long time before finally closing the phone. The next morning was Saturday. I knew what I had to do. By noon the next day, I had baked one of Mom's favorites, apple crumble with extra cinnamon, just the way she used to make it when we were kids. I boxed it carefully, then added a bottle of Riesling I knew would disarm her. The plan wasn't to argue, it was to blend in. When I arrived at the house, Sable opened the door this time, already dressed in a pressed navy blouse and pearl earrings, her expression curated like everything else in her life. "Twice in a week," she said, stepping aside. "You're on a roll." "Thought I'd bring dessert," I said, holding out the box. "And the wine." "Well," she chuckled, "at least one of us is still trying to keep things sweet." Marcella appeared from the hallway, moving slower than usual. "That's lovely, Isabel," she said, taking the pie. "We'll have it after dinner." "Need help in the kitchen?" I asked, already stepping in that direction. No, she waved a hand. "Just relax. Everything's handled." But I didn't go to the couch. I took the opportunity to return a serving dish I had borrowed weeks ago. It gave me an excuse to go down the hallway toward the laundry room and past the kitchen door, which wasn't quite closed. That's when I heard it. Her voice. Calm, low, too casual to be innocent. "She just needs one good night's sleep," Sable said. "Everything will fall into place after that." Someone murmured agreement, but I couldn't tell who. "I've done this before. She always comes around," Eventually, silence. Then, she's always been delicate. She just doesn't know what's best for herself. My hand tightened around the dish. I waited a few seconds more, then backed away, stepping lightly down the hall toward the guest bathroom. Inside, I shut the door and locked it. My pulse beat in my neck, quick and loud. This wasn't about just control anymore. It wasn't about the estate or my absence from the gallery wall. This was strategy, elimination, cloaked in family concern. I turned toward the vanity. The drawer stuck a little when I opened it, like it hadn't been touched in a while. Inside were the usual items: cotton pads, expired toothpaste, a rusted pair of tweezers, and then I saw it, a small amber bottle tucked in the back corner. No label, just a white cap and a faint residue of adhesive where a sticker had once been. I picked it up slowly, holding it to the light. There was a faint code etched into the bottom, letters and numbers. I didn't recognize it, but I took out my phone and typed it into a medical database app I'd downloaded after the last visit. Barbiturate, high dose, typically used in surgical settings or to induce sleep under monitored conditions. In large quantities, it could impair memory, motor function, or worse. My fingers felt suddenly cold against the bottle. I returned it to its exact position, closed the drawer carefully, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My own eyes stared back, wide, calm, but no longer confused. I returned to the dining room just as Marcella was pouring water into glasses. The table was already set, 3 places. "You didn't have to cook," I told her, setting the dish on the counter. "It was already planned," she said, barely looking at me. Sable came in behind me, glancing toward the guest bathroom. "All good?" "Perfect," I said, taking my seat. Dinner passed with idle conversation. Marcella asked about the weather. Sable mentioned some donation drive she was chairing. Neither brought up the estate, neither brought up the documents, but I could feel it in the air between bites, thick, intentional. Toward dessert, Sable stood and moved to the kitchen counter. "I made a fresh pot of tea," she said, reaching for the cups. I watched her pour. I watched her glance toward me. Then I watched her hands, smooth, rehearsed, set 1 cup in front of me with just the tiniest flourish. "Sleep like a baby," she said, almost under her breath. I didn't touch it, not yet, because when you stirred that tea, you also stirred the storm. The cup of tea sat untouched on the dining table that evening, cooling in silence while Sable talked about the family trust like it was her inheritance by birthright. I didn't say a word, not yet. But inside, something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. 2 days passed without any direct contact from her. No text. No just checking in message. I think she felt it too, that the balance had shifted. Something between us had cracked, and we both knew it. But only one of us was ready to face what came next. Monday morning, just after 10 a.m., I found a small manila envelope tucked beneath my apartment door. There was no return address, no postage, just my name, printed in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside there was a photo, Sable, standing in line at a local pharmacy holding a bottle I'd seen before. Her expression wasn't casual. She looked hurried, intent. Taped to the photo was a note on hotel stationery. It read, "Be careful, she did it to me once. H.S." I stared at those 2 letters until they blurred. Harlan Sykes, Sable's ex from college, the one she dated for 2 years, then dumped seemingly overnight. I hadn't seen or heard his name in nearly a decade. Back then, I remembered Sable calling him paranoid, unstable. She said he made up things, accused her of messing with his prescriptions. "I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me," she'd told us, with tears in her eyes. "He needs help." I had believed her. I carried the envelope to my desk and sat down, laying the photo flat beneath the lamp. I opened my laptop, then froze, because suddenly I remembered something I had dismissed months ago. A voicemail from Thaddeus Kroll. My father's estate attorney. I had ignored it, assuming it was another dry update about tax forms or account maintenance, but something in my gut told me to find it now. I searched my email, clicked into the backup server, and scrolled through deleted audio files until I found one labeled Kroll, 3 months ago. I hit play. The voice was staticky at first, then resolved into the familiar cadence of Thaddeus, measured, professional. Isabel, I know we haven't spoken directly in some time, but I wanted to make you aware of something. Your father left very clear instructions that you were to retain primary access to his trust. That authority was not meant to be shared. I have reason to believe some changes were made recently, and I fear they may not reflect your father's wishes. I pressed pause, heart racing. He had known. Before I did. Before I even noticed. I scribbled the quote into a notebook, then replayed it twice. Every word cemented what I had already begun to suspect. Sable had bypassed the original documents, perhaps with our mother's passive blessing, perhaps on her own. Either way, she'd rewritten the rules while I was still grieving. I set down the pen and walked to the kitchen, needing distance from the buzzing in my chest. The envelope was still open on the table. The photo inside hadn't moved. Harlan's warning echoed in my mind. What had he gone through? I closed my eyes and remembered the last time I'd seen them together, years ago, at a 4th of July barbecue at Mom's house. Harlan had seemed quieter than usual, tired, distracted. I remember him missing cues in conversation, losing track of his car keys twice in the same hour. Back then, Sable said he was under pressure. Work stress, she called it, and he's sensitive about being questioned. Now, with that photo in hand, I wondered if it had been more than stress. Maybe his fog hadn't come from within, but from something poured into a drink, handed to him with a smile. It wasn't paranoia, it was a pattern. Sable had a way of erasing people without ever laying a hand on them. I returned to my desk and opened a fresh USB drive from the drawer. Over the next 2 hours, I scanned every document I had, signed forms, email printouts, screenshots of bank notices. I cataloged them into folders: legal, personal, medical. Then I printed the voicemail transcript and slid it into a red folder labeled Dad's Will. At the top of a new notebook, I wrote the sentence that had bloomed in my chest like fire. Sable, I'm awake now. No more assuming. No more forgetting. No more hoping someone else would step in to do the right thing. I created backups. Stored one copy in my kitchen drawer, another inside a hollow book in the living room. I labeled the third recipes and tucked it into a box of old cookbooks, just in case. That night, I sat in the quiet, tea cooling on the windowsill, untouched again. Outside, the street lamp flickered once, then steadied. I thought about my father, his voice, his hands, the way he always double-checked the locks before going to bed. Trust, he used to say, is earned in silence and broken in whispers. And if she crossed the line again, I'd be the one drawing it. Saturday morning came with the kind of heavy gray sky that made the world feel quieter. I was on the road by 9 o'clock, coffee in one hand, a canvas bag filled with cleaning gloves, folders, and a hard plastic file box in the other. On the surface, I was visiting to help Mom clean out old papers before the holidays. But in truth, I had one purpose: find what they didn't want me to see. Marcella greeted me with the faintest hint of surprise. "You're early," she said, stepping aside so I could enter. "I figured we'd need more than a few hours," I said, walking in like it wasn't my first undercover mission in my own family. Sable wasn't home yet, or at least her car wasn't in the driveway. Good, I could work faster without her hovering. We started with the basement: old yearbooks, boxes of ornaments, brittle photo albums from before I was born. I played my part, dusting, organizing, asking Marcella about long-lost cousins I didn't care about. She softened a bit, even chuckled once at a picture of Dad in a hideous Christmas sweater. By noon, we paused for a sandwich in the kitchen. I offered to take the recycling out and walked the long way around the block. On my way back, I spotted her. Delilah Croft, standing outside the grocery store with a paper bag in one arm and a reusable tote hanging from the other. "Delilah?" I asked, slowing my step. She turned, surprised, but not unpleasantly so. "Isabel, I haven't seen you in, 5 years? Probably closer to 6. We stood in the chill air for a moment, awkward, before I broke the silence. I could use 5 minutes of your honesty. No judgment, I promise. Her eyes narrowed just a little, but she nodded. There's a cafe next door. We sat in the farthest booth, away from the windows. I'm just going to ask, I said plainly. Did Sable ever mess with Mom's medication? Delilah didn't answer right away. She stirred her coffee like it was a delicate decision. I never told anyone, she finally said. I didn't want to cause trouble. Tell me anyway. One time, Marcella had just come home from a hospital stay. She was still recovering, sleepy all the time, confused. I noticed her pill bottles were rearranged. Same labels, different colors. I asked Sable. She said the pharmacy must have changed suppliers. Delilah looked me straight in the eye. I called the pharmacy. They hadn't. I let that sink in. Did you report it? I told your mother. She said I was overstepping. 3 weeks later, I was let go. I nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. Back at the house, Marcella was napping upstairs. I took that as my moment. I headed for the home office, the one room that had remained locked since Dad passed. I didn't have a key, but I remembered where he kept the spare, inside a hollowed-out dictionary in the hall bookshelf. The lock clicked open with a quiet finality. I stepped into the room. The scent hit me first, cedarwood, dust, and paper. It was untouched. His desk, still stacked with books and folders, sat beneath the window. A framed photo of us, me and him at the county fair, laughing, was tucked behind a paperweight. I searched quickly but methodically. Bottom right drawer, locked. I used a flathead from the nearby utility drawer and popped it open. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue folder, was what I came for. The original estate trust and handwritten notes, some barely legible. I unfolded the first document and nearly dropped it. My name, Isabel Marie Fayleith, primary beneficiary. It was dated 4 months before his death. His signature scrawled at the bottom, witnessed by Thaddeus Kroll. Attached to it was a yellowing note in Dad's handwriting. Only Isabel reads people clearly. She's the compass. My throat tightened. I sat down hard in the leather chair, the folder still open across my knees. All this time I doubted myself. Wondered if I was being too dramatic, too reactive. But here it was, proof that I wasn't crazy, that he'd seen the same things I had, that he'd trusted me to hold the line when others couldn't. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. Sable's voice carried up the staircase, light and overly cheerful. I closed the drawer, locked it, and slipped the folder into my coat lining. I took one last glance at the photo on the desk, then quietly shut the door. Dinner was quiet. Marcella was back downstairs, and Sable acted like nothing had happened. She passed the salad bowl, poured wine, made small talk about the town's tree lighting ceremony next week. Later, while clearing plates, I found myself alone with Sable in the kitchen. The water was running, but the tension between us filled the space. I turned to her and said evenly, I found it. She stopped rinsing a glass. Found what? You know what I mean. Her hand tightened on the edge of the sink, just for a second. Then, a half-smile tugged at her mouth. You've always had a wild imagination, Izzy. That's not what Dad thought. She turned off the faucet. Well, he's not here anymore, is he? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both stood in silence until Marcella called from the dining room, asking for the dessert plates. Sable didn't look back as she left the room. But I did, because I'd seen something in her eyes, something dangerous. Her eyes said it all. She wasn't done, but neither was I. The air outside that morning was painfully crisp, the kind of cold that burns your lungs just enough to remind you you're alive. I drove to the house without music, letting the silence hold my focus. It was Sunday, the day Sable declared a family tradition brunch, something she invented out of nowhere a few months after Dad passed. Marcella went along with it, of course. She went along with everything lately. I arrived early, though not so early as to seem suspicious. My coat was buttoned to the neck, and beneath it I wore a black turtleneck with a small inside pocket sewn into the lining. In it sat a folded copy of the estate document and the note in Dad's handwriting. A second copy lived in my glove box. A third had been mailed to a lawyer friend in Boston. Isabel, Sable greeted as I stepped through the door, voice sugary sweet. Right on time. You look surprisingly composed. I forced a smile. Sleep's been good lately. She didn't know what to do with that. Her head tilted slightly, lips pressing together in a tight, unreadable smile. Marcella emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of glasses. Everyone's in the dining room. The Andersons are here, and the Finches. Her voice sounded distracted, as though rehearsing lines for a play she didn't want to be in. Sable guided me into the dining room, full of gleaming silverware and polite small talk. I took my place at the table, noting the perfect symmetry of the setup, plates centered, napkins folded just so. Sable thrived in symmetry. It made chaos easier to control. As brunch began, Sable moved between guests with grace, pouring coffee, directing conversation, making sure no plate was empty for long. She was the picture of domestic confidence. Tea? She asked, turning to me mid-serving. Sure, I replied, keeping my voice even. She poured from a ceramic pot into a pale pink teacup with gold trim. My cup. It had always been mine since I was 15 and claimed it during one of Mom's garage sales. She set it in front of me, then turned to refill Marcella's glass. While everyone chatted about new condos going up by the lake, I reached forward as if adjusting my napkin. In that moment, with a slight shift under the table, I swapped cups. Her cup for mine, the real one, the one she meant for me, now sat inches from her elbow. She returned, sat beside me, and took a long sip without hesitation. 10 minutes passed. Sable was still moving through conversations effortlessly, her voice calm, her jokes well-timed. I nodded at all the right moments, even laughed once. My heart pounded under my ribs like a warning bell, but I didn't let it show. Then it started. Her words slowed, slightly at first. A pause between thoughts. Then a misstep. Marcella, she said, blinking more than usual. Did you remember to send what is it? The invite to the, She trailed off. Marcella furrowed her brow. Sable? Sable waved a hand, chuckling weakly. I'm fine, just lightheaded. Maybe the tea's too strong today. She tried to laugh again, but it came out flat. Her hand trembled as she reached for her cup. I watched every movement. Another 5 minutes. She pushed her chair back and stood, but too quickly. Her foot caught the leg of the table, and the teacup tipped, spilling dark liquid across the white tablecloth. I just need to, she began, then stumbled. People stood. Marcella gasped. Sable staggered back a step, then collapsed. The room exploded into noise. Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance!" Others rushed to her side. I stayed still for a beat longer than I should have, then moved toward her. She was breathing, shallow, uneven, but conscious. Her eyes flicked around the room, unfocused. Marcella dropped to her knees, cradling Sable's head. "What's wrong?" she cried. "Sable, talk to me!" I picked up the fallen cup, lifting it to my nose. The scent was unmistakable. Floral, yes, but bitter underneath. I'd only smelled it once before, months ago, when Mom fainted in the garden. "That's," Marcella whispered, staring at the cup. "That's what I drank." That day I fell. I turned to her, calm. It wasn't dehydration. It wasn't your age. It was her. Marcella looked at me, at the cup, then at her daughter, lying semi-conscious on the floor. The guests stood frozen, unsure whether to stay or go. A few began whispering. Someone stepped out to call 911. I knelt beside Sable as Marcella wept quietly behind me. "You've done this before," I said under my breath, only for her to hear. "But not again." Her eyes fluttered open for a second, enough to register that I knew, enough to know I'd won this round. Marcella took the cup from my hands, turned it over slowly, and inhaled. "I didn't want to believe it," she murmured. I stood. "There's something you need to see," I told her. The air in the house hadn't settled. It felt thick, like everyone was breathing through gauze. No one moved. No one dared. Sable lay sprawled on the couch, her body limp but conscious. barely. Her face had lost its color, and her lips parted slightly, as though she might say something but couldn't find the right words, or the strength. Marcella sat in the armchair across from her, knees pressed together, hands folded tight in her lap. She looked stunned, not just by what had happened, but by how quickly it had unraveled. Around the room, relatives whispered in clusters. The Finches stood by the windows, arms crossed, eyes flicking back and forth between Marcella and me. The Andersons hovered near the hallway, making half-hearted gestures of, should we leave? But never quite committing. Nobody touched their drinks. Nobody said Sable's name out loud. I stepped out of the kitchen, a small black USB drive clutched in my palm. Before anyone decides what they think happened, I said, voice steady, I want to show you something. The room turned toward me like a tide shifting. Marcella looked up slowly. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't anything yet, just wide, blank, waiting. I moved to the entertainment center. The TV was already on, muted from earlier. I pulled the remote from the table, clicked over to the input menu, and inserted the USB into the port. The screen flickered, then went black. And then the video started. It was security camera footage, crisp, grainy, time-stamped from 2 days ago. The camera angle showed the kitchen from the far end, just above the pantry. We all watched as a woman entered frame, Sable, her hair tied back in that deliberate bun she wore when pretending to be casual. She moved to the counter, opened a drawer, pulled out a small bottle. Someone in the room inhaled sharply. On the footage, Sable poured hot water into a cup, then unscrewed the bottle cap. Her hands worked quickly, practiced. She stirred, glanced over her shoulder once, then replaced the cup back on the tray with 2 others. She wiped the counter, then smiled. In real time, no one in the room moved. I paused the video on that smile. There's a lab report, I said quietly. The cup she gave me tested positive for a high-concentration sedative, barbiturate-based, enough to impair memory, judgment. If I had drunk it? Marcella stood. Her legs wobbled. I recognize that bottle, she said, voice thin. That's what she gave me before I fell. I thought I was just tired, but I couldn't remember things that day. Her hand came to her mouth. Sable shifted on the couch, groaning slightly. Marcella turned to her. Tell me this isn't true, she whispered. Sable didn't answer. Someone in the back muttered, Jesus Christ. I ejected the USB, placed it on the coffee table, and pulled a red folder from my bag. Inside was everything. Photocopies of Dad's handwritten will, notarized documentation, and a transcript of the voicemail from Thaddeus Kroll. I'd even included the pharmacy's product sheet matching the residue in the cup. I laid the folder beside the USB. This is for the lawyer, I said. Or the police. Your call, Marcella. She didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she sat back down, staring at Sable like she was a stranger. Someone who'd arrived wearing her daughter's face but had none of her softness, none of her soul. Sable stirred, eyes fluttering. She mumbled, I didn't mean... Marcella's voice came fast, louder than I'd ever heard it. Enough! The word cracked through the room like thunder. You almost killed your sister. You drugged me. You manipulated this entire family for what? For what, Sable? Sable didn't respond. Her breathing was uneven. One of the cousins took out their phone, dialing emergency services. Marcella finally reached for the folder. Her hands trembled as she pulled it into her lap, flipping the first page. Her eyes scanned quickly, slowing only at Dad's note. Only Isabel reads people clearly. She shut the folder, closed her eyes, and nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The ambulance lights lit up the front of the house 10 minutes later. They took Sable away without cuffs, yet. But everyone in that room knew it was only a matter of time. I walked Marcella to the door as the EMTs loaded Sable into the vehicle. She'll spin it, I warned. She'll say it was a misunderstanding, a mix-up. I know, Marcella said, her voice heavier than I'd ever heard it. She paused, then added, but she won't spin me. Not again. I nodded. For once, we were on the same page. 2 months slipped by like snow melting into the cracks of the city. By late January, The streets of Burlington had lost their holiday sparkle. Christmas lights still clung to porches, but now they flickered half-heartedly, like they too were ready to move on. I had moved into a new apartment 2 blocks from the lake. Nothing fancy, but it faced the sunrise and had silence I hadn't known I needed. Not the brittle kind I used to find at Mom's house, where love came with conditions and praise was measured like rations. No, this was a silence I had earned, the kind you get after a storm when the winds stop arguing with the trees. I stood by the window that morning, watching snow dust the railing. My father's plant sat on the sill, a hardy peace lily he'd given me years ago with a laugh and said, "Even you can't kill this one, Izzy." I watered it carefully now, as though it tethered me to something unshaken. There were no texts from Sable. Of course there weren't. No messages from her old friends either. No polite invites to fundraisers or cold birthday wishes. It was like someone had drawn a thick black line between her name and mine, and for once, I didn't feel the urge to erase it. The sentencing had taken place the week after Christmas, courtroom packed, reporters lingering outside, their voices hushed but eyes gleaming. Inside, the judge read the charges with a firm, measured tone: attempted poisoning, fraud, forgery. There were no gasps in the room, just silence, and one collective exhale. 18 years. No possibility of parole before serving 15. Sable stood as the sentence was read, her posture brittle but proud. She didn't cry, didn't plead, not once, just stared ahead like she still thought she'd find a way out, maybe next week, maybe after the cameras were gone. Marcella testified, her voice trembling but resolute. "My daughter," she said, gripping the edge of the stand, "betrayed her sister. And she betrayed me. I spent years thinking I was protecting the strong one, only to realize I was shielding the dangerous one." I hadn't expected her to say that. I'd braced for a softer version, something about missteps and confusion, but Marcella said it plainly, publicly. That afternoon, I walked out of the courthouse alone. No reporters followed me. I wasn't the story, not anymore, and thank God for that. A week later, Marcella called. She asked if she could stop by. When she arrived, she didn't carry flowers or a bottle of wine. Just herself, and an old photograph of the 3 of us, taken before things began to rot beneath the surface. We sat in the small living room of my apartment, nursing cups of peppermint tea. For once, it was just tea. She looked around the room, nodded slowly. "It's quiet here." "It's enough," I said. After a pause, she handed me the photo. "I found this when I was going through the drawers in your father's office. I almost threw it out." I took it. We were young, me about 9, Sable grinning with braces, Marcella smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. My father's arm was wrapped around my shoulder. "I don't expect us to be what we were," she said gently. "But I'm trying. That's all I can offer." I nodded. "I can live with that." She stayed for an hour. We didn't rehash the trial or ask the questions that had no answers. We just sat. 2 women finally unlearning a script neither of us had written, but both had performed too long. Later that evening, I walked to the lake. The snow was deep, soft underfoot, each step slow and deliberate. In my coat pocket was the same photograph. I held it tight as I reached the edge of the water, wind teasing the corners. I looked at it once more, then let it go. The photo fluttered for a moment before the breeze caught it, carrying it just far enough that it landed gently atop the ice-kissed water. It floated, then slowly began to sink, edge first, like it had made peace with the letting go. "I didn't win," I whispered to the stillness. I survived. The sky above held no stars, just a pale moon, quiet and cold. I turned and walked home. Sometimes the most painful betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who claim they love you most. Isabel didn't just survive her sister's lies. She uncovered a legacy of silence that too many families still live with. So here's a question. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own home? Share your story in the comments. And if this one made you think twice about quiet family members, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true-life revenge stories and emotional family dramas. You never know who's stirring your tea. Hi, I'm Delphine. My parents used to call me the help at family events. They'd say things like, "You don't eat with us, you assist." So I did what any obedient daughter would do. I stayed quiet, cleared plates, smiled through it. But after being told, again, that I wasn't really family, I made a decision. I bought the entire resort they vacation at every summer. And now, they eat on land they don't even know belongs to me. But what hurts more than their words is what came next. The lawsuit, the fake Facebook posts, the whispered lies at church brunch. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by the people who raised you, while still being expected to pay the bill? Let me show you. The next morning, no one noticed I was gone until the cake had already been served. I had been gone for hours by then, long enough to pack my small suitcase, check out under another name, and drive down the winding roads back to my own place without hitting traffic. Funny thing, traffic. People think it's the obstacle, but silence, the kind where you expect someone to call your name and they don't, that's heavier than any rush hour. When I pulled up to the family resort the day before, I already knew how the day would go. My mother had sent the invitation on group text, not directly, not personally. Just a link to the event page with a "would be nice if you came." Not "please come," not "we'd love to see you," just "would be nice." That's how it always started. The lobby was dressed like a wedding catalog. White roses, dripping candle chandeliers, linen napkins folded like origami swans. Every inch of it screamed curated warmth, but none of it felt like home. I caught a glimpse of my brother, Branson, near the check-in. Of course he got the hug. The proud smile. The handshake from Uncle Roy, the one who never remembered my name unless I wore a name tag. Branson spotted me and gave a nod, like he was greeting a distant coworker. Not a sister. Certainly not the girl who once covered for him in high school when he snuck out past curfew. But maybe I should have expected that. Branson had always played it safe. He became exactly who my parents hoped one of us would be. Doctor, married. Divorced now, but that's another story. White picket fence in the suburbs, 401k. Dentist clean smile. The golden one. I stepped up to the reception table and gave my name. The woman behind the clipboard flipped a few pages. Then she smiled, confused. "Oh, you're not on the guest seating list, but your mom said you'd help with appetizers. I think you're on the catering team's list instead." She said it kindly, like it made sense. I didn't argue. I just nodded, reached for the tray of deviled eggs they offered, and walked toward the patio. That's when I realized. No one had even asked why I didn't bring someone. No, "where's your +1?" No, "glad you could make it." I was a fixture, something to fill a gap. Not a guest, not a daughter. As I wove through the crowd, balancing a tray, I passed Aunt Sylvia gossiping loudly by the mimosa bar. "Delphine?" she said, squinting like she was trying to remember if I was someone's assistant. "Isn't she doing something with computers? Online?" My mother chimed in, laughing. "She helps with some projects. You know, little things. She likes to keep herself busy." Busy. That word. Not successful, not driven, just busy. Like a bored housewife tinkering with paint-by-number crafts. Someone reached for an egg from my tray, didn't even look me in the eye, and asked, "Could you grab more lemon water, please?" He thought I worked there, and no one corrected him. At that moment, I wanted to say something, anything. But what would I even say? "Actually, I own this resort now?" Not yet. Not like that. There's a time and a way to deliver the truth, and this wasn't it. Dinner came. I watched them set the table, round, elegant, marked with name cards. Everyone was called over, seated with smiles and camera phones snapping away. I stood near the edge, waiting. Branson was already toasting with Dad. My seat never appeared. I approached cautiously. Maybe it was a mistake. My father didn't even look up. Dell, you can eat after. They're short-staffed. Help get the older folks settled first, will you? He waved his hand toward the back, like I was one of the servers. My fingers wrapped around the edge of a napkin, a little too tightly. I stood there for 1 beat, then 2, waiting, hoping someone would say something, but no one did. Branson didn't even meet my eyes, so I turned, walked toward the service door that led to the kitchen. I paused halfway, between 2 worlds, one I never truly belonged to, and one I had spent years building from scratch. "I'm not your staff," I whispered. No one heard. A young girl with a catering badge passed me with a smile and a quick, "Excuse me." I stepped aside for her. At least she acknowledged me. Outside, the air was cooler than expected. I leaned against the wooden railing overlooking the vines that stretched beyond the property line, steady and unconcerned. My phone buzzed. 1 word, finalized. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let the breeze touch my cheek like a quiet reminder. Then, I turned toward the lodge, still filled with clinking glasses and stories I wasn't invited into, and murmured under my breath, "Then I guess it's mine now." 2 hours later, I was gone, and nobody noticed until the cake had already been served. I had left before the eggs were cold, before the patio started buzzing with champagne toasts and mimosa-fueled nostalgia. I didn't bother saying goodbye. That would have implied I'd been welcomed in the first place. The morning air was softer than I expected. Fog clung to the edges of the vineyard, like it didn't want to let the day begin. My heels clicked against the flagstone as I stepped back into the dining hall, trying to shrink into the background without actually disappearing. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to be present long enough for no one to accuse me of not showing up. By the time I arrived, most people were already halfway through breakfast. Branson was holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by cousins and uncles, who still called him Doc, even though they knew about the malpractice board review. Reputation always ran slower in this family, especially when denial was a better suit to wear than accountability. I hovered near the buffet, pouring myself a small cup of coffee. My mother spotted me and waved, not to join the table, but to point toward the mimosa pitcher. She mouthed, "Could you refill that?" Like I'd volunteered for brunch duty. I gave her a small smile, not because I wanted to, but because it felt easier than refusing. That's when I noticed the photographer. Black slacks, black vest, professional gear around his neck. The same man who had taken pictures the night before. He was adjusting the lighting near the east-facing windows and calling out to the family. "Let's get one with all immediate family. Quick shot before dessert?" People began rising from their seats. My mother clapped lightly. "Branson, get up here. Stand next to your dad. Sylvia, make sure the little ones don't block the front." I moved, instinctively, toward the forming cluster. Then paused. The photographer looked around and asked, "Is this everyone?" And my father, without even glancing in my direction, said, "Let's keep it tight. No need to overcomplicate the frame." My feet stopped. No one turned. Branson adjusted his tie and slipped into place between Merrick and my mother like he was born to belong. I stepped back. Quietly, deliberately. The kind of retreat you make when you've learned that staying costs more than leaving. The camera shutter clicked. I didn't hear my name once. As the photo wrapped, I heard a cousin near the juice bar murmur, "Awkward," followed by a short laugh. I didn't turn around. I refilled the mimosa pitcher. No one said thank you. I didn't expect them to. When breakfast wound down, a second table was being cleared at the far end of the room. Smaller, no place cards. One server began placing utensils in a quick, impersonal rhythm. I assumed it was for late arrivals or overflow, so I picked up my plate and made my way to the main table. Just as I had done dozens of times before in my life. Somewhere between hopeful and naive. My mother caught my movement and leaned in, smiling too tightly. "Oh no, honey," she whispered. "This table's for family. Yours is over there, with the kitchen crew. You understand?" I froze. Not out of surprise, but out of exhaustion. I had no more rebuttals left. No more energy to explain why that smile cut deeper than a slap. I simply turned and walked toward the other table. And that's when I decided. This would be the last time they saw me fill silence with service. Once I finished eating, I excused myself and stepped outside. The sun had finally risen past the fog line, casting soft gold over the rows of grapevines. I took out my phone, tapped on a calendar reminder, and dialed a number I had memorized but never used aloud. "Yes," I said when the assistant answered. "I'll confirm the board review document by Tuesday. Also, let's schedule the ribbon cutting for next month. Coordinate with local press." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Congratulations, Ms. Hoyt. Full ownership, it's official." I hung up. Across the vineyard, the resort stood tall and oblivious, its main deck hosting the final brunch clinks of a family that never knew I was in the room, much less in control of the building. A hummingbird zipped past my ear, its wings a blur of intention. I let it pass. No one inside noticed I was missing. Again. But this time, it felt different. This time, they were standing on my floor. By the time my letter arrived on their doorstep, I was already 50 miles away, and freer than I'd felt in years. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving the resort early. I didn't owe that to people who hadn't noticed when I was standing right next to them. While they sliced into lemon cake and toasted to family traditions, I was already halfway to my house, windows rolled down, letting the wind do the talking. I needed the quiet. I needed space from rooms where I only ever existed in service, not in memory. But silence has a half-life. It lingers longer than it should. And by late morning, I found myself driving back. Not home, not quite, but back toward the lounge area, where the extended family had gathered for one last round of coffee before checkout. I wasn't there for them. I just needed to walk in, see it clearly, feel it fully, and know that when I left this time, I meant it. The lounge smelled of burnt espresso and too much cologne. They always wore too much cologne, like scent could distract from character. I slipped in through the side entrance, past the antique piano my uncle always bragged about owning a replica of. Nobody looked up. A few chairs scraped against tile, laughter echoed across the room. My mother was perched in the corner, sipping her drink with a posture that said she was tired, but only of pretending to care. "Branson," someone said from across the room, "we heard about the board suspension. How's that going?" There was a long pause. Then one of my cousins, Janine, I think, cleared her throat and added, "It's probably just temporary, right? Everyone knows these things blow over." My Aunt Sylvia leaned forward. "He's under pressure, that's all. Still, a doctor is a doctor." I waited to hear my name. I waited to hear anything about what I'd done, or hadn't done. Nothing. I sat near the window, letting my silence take up more space than usual. There's a particular ache that comes from watching people rewrite the story while you're still in the room, like you're the ghost of your own timeline. Then came the real gut punch. Uncle Ross, polishing off his second whiskey before noon, said it loud enough to be heard by anyone not actively trying to ignore me. Delphine should be grateful she doesn't have kids. Imagine the mess she'd make of that. I didn't flinch. Aunt Margie chuckled, swirling her drink like it made her wiser. She always was a little off, not built for real life. My mother just nodded. Not a word in my defense. Not a breath of discomfort. Just that same expression she wore at church. Detached approval. My stomach turned, but I stayed still. That's a skill you learn in families like mine. How to stay still when everything inside you wants to stand and scream. Someone from across the table, probably one of Branson's golf buddies, smirked and said, "Hey, Branson, your sister's still doing websites or something?" He laughed, shrugged. "I think she moved into property now. She's always got some little project going. You know her." I looked up just once and said calmly, "Actually, I closed on a 7-figure deal last month." That should have landed like a thunderclap. Instead, my father glanced at me, nodded without real attention, and said, "That's nice, dear. Anyway, Branson." And just like that, the spotlight went back to him. As if I hadn't spoken. As if my success was a polite interruption in the main event of his mediocrity. I stood slowly, placed my half-full cup on the side table, and started to walk away. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going or if I was okay. Then a voice, soft, small, honest, came from behind. "Why don't you live near Grandma and Grandpa?" It was my niece. Her hair still damp from a morning swim, her eyes too young to lie. I knelt beside her, looked her straight in the eye, and said gently, "Because even grown-ups know when they're not welcome." She tilted her head like she didn't fully understand. But she would. One day. I walked out without another word. The sunshine hit different this time. It wasn't warm. It was clarifying. As I crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. A message from my attorney. "Full transfer confirmed. You own 100%. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stopped walking and stared out at the edge of the vineyard beyond the lot, past the rows of grapevines and the neat white fencing. You don't need to burn bridges. Some collapse on their own when you stop carrying the weight. I stayed one final night, not out of obligation, but because I needed to end things clean. I didn't want anyone to say I stormed out, or that I made a scene. Quiet exits are harder to rewrite in family lore. The resort had finally emptied out by evening. No more heels clacking down the hallway. No more wine-stained laughter drifting from the main hall. Just the slow hum of cleaning machines and the gentle hush of linens being folded by hands that worked with more grace than anyone gave them credit for. I closed the door to my suite behind me and exhaled. The kind of exhale that only comes when you're not trying to hold your shape for other people anymore. I folded each piece of clothing carefully, out of habit, not sentiment. I wasn't packing to retreat. I was packing to conclude. To step out of a role I never auditioned for, but was cast in anyway. There was a notepad on the desk. Resort stationery, gold-trimmed. I sat down, picked up the pen, and wrote what needed to be said. If I was never family in your heart, don't expect me to act like one on paper. I paused. No rage, no sobbing, just clarity. You raised me out of duty, I'm leaving out of choice. I left the note on the desk. No envelope, no signature. Anyone who read it would know who it came from. Then, I opened the folder my lawyer had sent over 2 days earlier. Inside was a final copy of the acquisition transfer, notarized and official. At the top, the Cecilia Resort, full acquisition authorization. Below it, my name, Delphine Hoyt, etched in confident font that no one in that family had ever said out loud with pride. Beside the papers was a photograph I always kept tucked into the sleeve of my planner. My grandmother, Cecilia, sitting on a rattan bench with me, age 7, cross-legged and barefoot beside her. She was the only one who ever told me, "You don't have to be good at everything to be loved." She passed when I was in college. Nobody from the family came to the funeral. They said it was too far, too last minute, or she wasn't really immediate family. But she was mine, always was. I had renamed the resort after her months ago, in the contracts, on the paperwork, in every internal system. No one knew, not yet. I walked the resort grounds slowly that night, past the pool, where the floating candles had already been removed, past the lawn, where yesterday they posed for a photo I was never invited into. The garden lights glowed softly, throwing shadows against the hedges. A young man from the cleaning crew nodded as I passed. "Evening, ma'am." I nodded back. He didn't know my full name, but he knew I signed the checks. That was enough. In the distance, the staff was still tidying up after my family, picking up cocktail napkins they couldn't be bothered to throw away, straightening chairs that had been left crooked. Watching them reminded me of something I read once. Power isn't in how loudly you speak, but in how many people stop when you whisper. And I hadn't even begun to whisper yet. Later that night, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea and watched the lights go out, one wing at a time. My phone sat next to me, screen dark. No one had texted. No one asked if I was coming to breakfast in the morning, or if I made it home. I wasn't surprised. I had trained myself not to expect much from people who always delivered less. Still, the silence wasn't heavy. It was final. Just before sunrise, I walked to the front gate. Maintenance was mounting the new signage as scheduled. Black iron lettering, clean, timeless. The Cecilia, a sanctuary of renewal. Below that, in smaller script, in honor of those who saw us before we saw ourselves. I didn't stay for the final drill into the concrete. I didn't need to. The plaque would outlast every false narrative they ever wrote about me. Let them spin their stories. I'd written mine in ink and deed. As I stood near the gravel drive, letting the early wind graze my skin, I felt something loosen. Not fall apart, just fall away. Like shedding a coat that never fit. Sometimes family doesn't raise you. Sometimes it's the strangers who never needed to love you, but did anyway. The bus driver who waited when you were late. The teacher who stayed after class. The grandmother who made space without asking you to shrink first. I turned back toward the building, now fully mine, and whispered, not to anyone in particular. I didn't leave to be seen. I left to see myself. 3 months passed, long enough for things to settle, but not enough for people like my family to forget. Not truly. They don't remember details. They remember optics. And the optics had shifted. That morning, as I stood on the second-floor balcony of the resort, my resort, I watched the event staff finish setting up the relaunch ceremony. White chairs on polished stone, hydrangeas imported from Santa Barbara, a modest arch draped in chiffon. Clean, quiet, elegant. No one from my family was invited. Not that they'd care. Not that they even knew. Well, not yet. I walked the venue in a navy sheath dress. The same one my mother once called cheap-looking at a Christmas brunch. Her exact words were, "Try something with structure, sweetheart. You always look like you're drowning in basics." That was the year Branson's wife showed up in a $1,200 dress and got a standing ovation for her side hustle making baby food pouches. Now, that cheap dress moved through the crowd of Napa executives, real estate developers, and hospitality insiders without drawing so much as a whisper, except maybe, "Who is she?" My name wasn't on the speaker list. I hadn't planned to say anything. But when the resort manager introduced the woman responsible for the rebirth of this historic property, and every head turned my way, I didn't flinch. I stepped forward and smiled like I'd rehearsed it. "Thank you," I said into the mic, "for being here. Not just to celebrate a building, but to witness something a little harder to rebuild. Identity." There was a pause. Respectful, quiet. I had them. I know what it feels like to be in a room and not be seen. To exist just outside the frame, behind the scenes, beneath the surface. That's where I lived for a long time. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I didn't need to. I didn't build this place to prove anything. I built it because I was tired of disappearing. There's a difference between leaving quietly and being silenced. I left a house, not a family. Because a family, at least to me, is where you're allowed to exist without auditioning for the role. Applause came slower than I expected, but when it did, it stayed with me longer than most things ever had. After the event, I slipped away before anyone could corner me for a quote. I didn't want sound bites. I wanted peace. But the internet doesn't believe in peace. 2 days later, a hospitality blogger posted a blurry photo of me beside the new resort signage. "Meet the woman behind the Cecilia." The caption underneath read, "She's not just the new owner. She's the reason it didn't go under." The post gained traction, then speed, then fire. My inbox flooded with messages from former coworkers, past acquaintances, even 2 cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. All variations of, "Is this you?" followed by emojis and links. I didn't reply. Then my phone vibrated again. This time, a text from a number I hadn't seen in a while. "Mom." The message was short. "Are you the Cecilia woman everyone's talking about?" I stared at the screen, read it twice, then let the phone fall face down on the table. That evening, I poured myself a glass of red and opened my laptop, half intending to draft a reply, half thinking I might delete it all. Instead, I stumbled on a folder labeled Unsent. Inside was a draft email I'd written months ago, addressed to my parents. It said, "I built something beautiful, but I never wanted to use it against you." I hovered over the send button, then I closed the window and hit delete. I didn't owe anyone my softness, not anymore. The resort lights flickered on as the sun began to dip. I stood at the balcony, looking down at a place they used to claim as theirs, taking credit for finding it, loving it, making it special. That was the lie they liked to pass around, that their legacy was what gave this place value. They'd be furious if they found out it was mine now, but they wouldn't say it directly. No, they'd find a more subtle way to say it, something like, "We just thought it would have stayed in the family." That was the thing, it never was. And just as I let that thought settle into my chest, my phone rang again. Not press. Not an investor. Dad. The name lit up the screen like a flare in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. Because if he was calling, it wasn't to apologize. It was to ask for something. I didn't answer the call. I didn't need to. Whatever he had to say would arrive another way. With my father, it always did. By mid-morning the next day, a courier showed up at my gate. No signature required. Just a thick white envelope in a manila sleeve, hand-delivered, sealed with embossed initials. It smelled faintly like the aftershave he used to wear. Woodsy, overbearing. A scent that lingered too long after he'd left the room. I opened it at the kitchen counter, next to the coffee I hadn't touched since it cooled. The paper was thick, expensive. Of course it was. The first page was a letter, typed, formal, stiff as cardboard. The kind that uses phrases like continued goodwill and amicable resolution. My parents, through their attorney, were requesting what they called a fair and honorable contribution toward decades of parental investment. They'd listed exact figures: tuition, summer camps, orthodontics, health insurance premiums, even groceries. The spreadsheet was titled, in all caps, Estimated Value of Upbringing. It included a suggested total, just shy of $620,000. They had itemized affection. I didn't laugh. I didn't rage. I sat down and read it line by line like it was a contract, because maybe that's all I ever was to them. A poorly performing asset looking to be offloaded with whatever payout they could spin into virtue. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the demand, but because of the precision. The gall of treating parenthood like a loan agreement. And me, a balance sheet to settle. 2 days later, I noticed movement on the perimeter camera at the front gate. I opened the app. There he was. Merrick Hoyt, my father. Standing with his hands behind his back, like a man visiting a grave he didn't really care about, but felt obligated to stop by. I didn't go out. I hit the intercom. "This isn't a place for drop-ins," I said flatly. He didn't flinch. "You always did like distance." "This is not the way to fix anything," I said. "I didn't come to fix. I came to speak." "There's nothing to say. You had years." He sighed, loud enough for the audio to pick up. "You were always hard to love, Del." I should have felt gutted. I didn't. Maybe because I'd heard it before. Maybe not those exact words, but enough close cousins of that phrase to know where I stood. I ended the call. Later that day, I had my legal team draft a response. Clear, cold, professional. "There will be no payment," the letter read. "The emotional labor extracted under the guise of familial duty has long exceeded your valuation." I attached the footage of him at my gate. Not to threaten, just to document. My lawyer called later that afternoon. "They'll go public," she said. "You know that, right?" "Let them," I replied. "They don't know how to stay quiet unless they're being ignored." And just like clockwork, 3 days later, an anonymous Facebook post started making rounds in our old neighborhood group. The kind of post written to sound humble, but carefully constructed to spread like wildfire. "Please pray for us," it began. "Our daughter, who's done well for herself, has chosen to cut ties. After all we've given, after all we've done." There was a photo attached, grainy. Me, walking out of the TEDx venue, cropped just enough to erase the signage, but leave the body language. I looked like I was rushing away from something shameful. The post closed with, "Sometimes success makes people forget where they came from." By midnight, it had been shared over 300 times. I clicked Save Post. I didn't comment. I didn't correct. I just watched. The next morning, I woke to 3 canceled meetings. A software partner backed out, citing concerns about recent personal press. One of my early investors requested a private conversation. And there it was. The plan. Not to take money, not even to win, but to stain. Make me small enough that whatever I'd built would feel shaky again, like I didn't deserve it, like I was too damaged to be trusted at the helm of anything more than grief. I stared out at the lavender field behind my kitchen, the breeze pushing purple blossoms in gentle waves. And I thought, this is why they raised me to be silent, so that when they screamed, no one would hear my side first. But they forgot one thing. I own my voice now. And no matter what came next, they couldn't take that back. That night, I didn't celebrate. I opened my laptop, and I rewrote every contract they ever hid behind. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by paper, bank statements, legal drafts, signed agreements with embossed logos. My attorney, Tamsin, had sent over everything I'd need if things escalated. She didn't say when. She said if, but we both knew better. By sunrise, my name was everywhere. Not because of the resort, not because of the TEDx talk, but because of the post. The one they seeded with just enough guilt to feel like scripture. Daughter makes millions and leaves her parents behind. No calls, no support, no visits. It had a photo, blurred of course. One they probably didn't take themselves, but encouraged someone else to share. A picture of me, walking across the parking lot in sunglasses and a linen blazer, like I was dodging cameras instead of heading to my car. The caption underneath read, "She forgot where she came from." Within hours, the coverage shifted from hospitality triumph to personal scandal. Commentators called me cold. One morning, Anchor referred to me as the billionaire who left her folks to rot. My inbox filled with meeting cancellations. One client cited values misalignment. Another said, "We just need to let the media cycle cool down." I didn't respond to any of it. I just called Tamsin. "Send the file," I told her. She didn't ask which one. 2 days later, the courtroom smelled of carpet glue and nerves. The kind of smell you don't notice unless you've sat in rooms where families break each other slowly through polite arguments and legal terms that feel clinical even when they're cutting deep. My parents sat 3 rows ahead of me. Merrick in a charcoal suit too sharp for sincerity, and Verlene in a navy blouse I remember from every graduation I ever had. Always worn like armor, never joy. Their lawyer was a man named Craig. Of course it was Craig, all firm jaw and practiced outrage. He stood and started with words like neglect, emotional harm, and moral dereliction. He painted me as a woman who had climbed out of their sacrifices and kicked the ladder away on the way up. I didn't flinch. Not when he brought up their support during her formative years. Not when he referenced the emotional weight borne by aging parents discarded in their twilight. And when he called me ungrateful, I just breathed through it. Then it was our turn. Tamsin didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. She moved with the precision of someone who knew that silence had weight when you placed it in the right corners. She pulled up a screen. "I'd like to present a collection of communications between Ms. Hoyt and her parents," she said, including a voicemail dated 2 years ago from Merrick Hoyt. The video played. The audio was crisp. "You're good with numbers, Delphine," Merrick's voice said through the speakers. "That's what you are, a glorified maid with a calculator." Gasps, then murmurs. The kind of hum that means people aren't quite shocked, just newly certain of something they'd suspected. The next clip was of my mother. I remembered that call. I hadn't saved it out of spite. I'd saved it because something in my gut told me I might need it one day. "I don't know what she's wearing. It looks like she bought it from a clearance bin at Ross. She never had taste, never had..." Polish. Someone in the audience coughed awkwardly. The judge looked up, and that was before Branson's voice joined the chorus, laughing in the background. Tamsin didn't say much after that. She didn't have to. The judge asked if there was context, if anyone else could verify what had been played. I didn't expect what came next. Glenora Pike walked in. My cousin. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not in stature, in weight, in how she carried herself. Like she had finally decided to put something down and walk without it. She was sworn in, sat down, and told the court what I had never asked anyone to say out loud. I was there, she said. Every Christmas, every dinner, every birthday. She paused. They'd talk over her, around her, like she wasn't even seated at the same table. Once, they thanked the caterer at Dad's retirement party, but not Delphine, even though she planned the whole thing. She pulled out her phone, played a voicemail forwarded from her mother. Verlene's voice again. Del was never like us. She's useful, not family. The room didn't make a sound for 3 full seconds. Then the judge adjusted his glasses. Case dismissed, he said. I didn't smile. As I stood to leave, reporters began to gather outside. I stepped through the glass doors into the light and said only this. I never abandoned them. I left before they could. Later that evening, as my legal team wrapped up paperwork, we delivered one final motion, one they weren't expecting. A restraining order. For both of them. It wasn't spite, it was protection. Because even adults who've grown out of childhood wounds can still bleed if someone keeps cutting in the same place. The headlines faded within 2 weeks. The interviews dried up, the hashtags cooled, and the world moved on. As it always does when outrage exhausts itself. The silence that followed was different. This one I chose. One Sunday morning, after my usual walk along the ridge behind the resort, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and recorded a 6-minute video. No makeup, no script. Just me, a soft cotton sweater, and a truth I wasn't ashamed of anymore. No, I didn't leave out of hate, I said, looking straight into the lens. I left because love wasn't a language we shared, not in that house. I spoke slowly. No names, no direct accusations. Just moments, snapshots that lived in my chest for too long. Sometimes people raise you to make you useful, not to make you feel loved. Sometimes you don't even realize what was missing until you try to build something different, something that doesn't hurt. The video was raw but not bitter. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about them. It was about me, finally stepping out from under the need to explain. Within hours, it crossed 2 million views. The comments poured in. You just told my story. I didn't know how much I needed to hear this until now. You said what I've never been able to say to my own parents. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That same week, my parents were spotted in town. Same grocery store, same post-church routine. But this time, someone approached them. Mr. Weldon Avery, our old neighbor from when I was 8, apparently saw them in the parking lot and walked up. I wasn't there, but a friend who still lived in the area called me about it that night. He didn't say it loud, she told me, but he said it plain. You didn't lose a daughter, you never made room for one. According to her, Verlene froze. Just stood there, holding a bag of apples like the air had left her lungs. Merrick muttered something about people not knowing the full story, but his face gave him away. He looked embarrassed, not ashamed, just exposed. That moment didn't change anything in the legal sense, but for me, it meant everything. Because for once, someone else said it, and not because I needed defending, but because they needed reminding. Glenora messaged me that same week. It came as a voice memo, the first one she'd sent since the day she testified. I'm not calling to apologize, she said. I figure if I have to say sorry, I probably don't mean it yet. She paused. But I see it now. I see all of it. They never let you be you. And I was part of that. I laughed when they joked about your shoes. I stood by when they cut your name from the thank you speech. There was another long pause. You don't need me to stand beside you, but I will, if you want that. I didn't reply. I didn't know if I wanted that. But I saved the message. Because sometimes recognition is worth more than reconciliation. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a glass of wine and went through old voicemails. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted to clear space. I deleted the message where Merrick asked if I'd finally stopped wasting money on vanity projects. I deleted Verlene's recording where she told me to think about how this looks on us. But I kept one. My grandmother, Cecilia. Soft voice, full of warmth. Don't worry, baby. You don't have to earn love here. I played that one twice. The next morning, I sat under the old cypress tree near the west lawn of the resort. The same place where guests now came to write, reflect, or just sit with their thoughts. I brought a blank journal, not for the public, not for TEDx, not for another speech, just for me. On the first page, I wrote, "Peace is not the silence of others. It's the end of needing their noise." Then I closed the book. I didn't need to write more that day. Sometimes the most powerful sentence is the one that doesn't chase approval. Later that week, I walked the perimeter trail around the property and passed by a mother and daughter staying for the weekend. The girl couldn't have been more than 10. She pointed to the plaque that read, "The Cecilia, a sanctuary of renewal." "Who's Cecilia?" she asked. The mom smiled and said, "Probably someone important." She had no idea how right she was. Forgiveness is not an invitation. It's just the end of pursuit. 6 months later, I found myself in front of a familiar building, a squat brick bank tucked into a quiet corner of a town that once called me one of their own. I hadn't stepped foot there since I was 21, the summer I tried to open my first business account. Back then, the manager asked if I had a husband to co-sign, and my mother told him not to worry, she just likes to play CEO. Now I was there with my lawyer, a file folder under my arm, and a signed termination document ready to be processed. The cabin had sat on land adjacent to my resort for decades. Technically owned by a holding company my father used to navigate tax loopholes, it had always been his space. But he'd long since transferred the legal claim without realizing the implications. I let him think he still controlled it, until now. "I'm donating the parcel," I told the clerk behind the window. "Transfer it to the Wildwood Foundation. They run housing programs for single mothers." The woman's eyes widened. "You're giving it away?" "I'm giving it back," I said, "to someone who might actually use it to protect people." Behind me, Tamsin gave a small nod. She'd warned me this might stir something. Headlines, family outrage, Facebook group drama. I didn't care. "They'll say you're petty," she reminded me in the parking lot afterward, sliding her sunglasses back on. "Let them," I said. "They used to call me invisible. This is an upgrade." By the end of that week, the paperwork was processed, the cabin keys delivered, the locks changed. I didn't expect thanks. I didn't need them. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of everything that came before were starting to show. Branson, I'd heard through mutual connections, had checked into a rehab center out in Marin, not paid for by family, but sponsored by an old college roommate he hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, people outside your circle are more likely to throw you a rope when you finally fall out of the one that kept you suffocating. Verlene stopped attending her usual luncheons. One woman from the Rotary Club told an acquaintance of mine that she looked thinner, quieter, and less curated. She wasn't used to being watched without admiration. Merrick still taught part-time, but his name had been removed from the board of a local nonprofit he once chaired. No public announcement, no statement, just gone. The kind of quiet removal you don't notice until someone else's name is printed where yours used to be. And me? I got a letter. No return address. Handwritten. Short. "You've made your point." No signature. I didn't even finish reading it. I smiled, fed it into my shredder, and went on with my day. Some people mistake silence for surrender. Others use it as shelter. But me, I'd learned that the best peace isn't the kind you have to prove. It's the kind you never have to defend. One afternoon, I drove through my old neighborhood. Not for nostalgia. I didn't need memory to keep me company anymore. I stopped in front of the house I grew up in, now aged and tired, just like the people who once ruled it. I didn't knock. I didn't need to see anyone. Instead, I pulled out a photograph I'd printed that morning. A snapshot of my grandmother and me, sitting on the porch of the Cecilia, back when it was just a dream scribbled in my notebook. We were laughing, real belly-deep joy, not the curated kind my mother used to force before holiday dinners. On the back, I wrote, "She was my family. She still is." I folded it once, slipped it into the mailbox, and drove away without looking back. That evening, back at the resort, I hosted a small gathering for young women in business. Mentorship Roundtable, they called it. I didn't speak from a stage. I sat among them, sleeves rolled, legs crossed, same old navy sheath dress I'd worn the day I claimed my name. One woman, barely 30, asked me, "How did you forgive them?" I sipped my water, smiled gently, and said, "I didn't. I just stopped giving them a voice in my story." There was a pause, a breath of understanding. Later, as the sun dropped behind the vineyard, I stood on the west balcony of the main lodge and let the silence stretch. My voice, in the back of my mind, not broken, not forced, rose again. "You don't owe healing to those who caused the wound," I thought. "You owe it to the part of yourself that survived. Because in the end, some doors aren't meant to stay open. Not all families are broken. Some are just finished. And that's okay." Hi, I'm Sedona. I used to think being the quiet one in the family meant peace, but it turns out it just made me easier to erase. They told me to postpone my wedding for my sister's emotions. Then they didn't show up at all. Later, I found out the guest list had been altered, money transferred from my account, and my face missing from my own photos. But what hurt most wasn't what they took. It was realizing they never saw me as part of the story to begin with. And when I finally spoke up, they sued me. What kind of family does that? And what happened when I finally stood up for myself? On the record? When I told my parents I was getting married, it was over meatloaf and mashed potatoes at the same dinner table I'd grown up around. Same creaky chairs, same butter dish, same unspoken tension. I had barely finished the sentence. "Daryl proposed?" When Mom put her fork down, slowly, like she was bracing for an aftertaste she didn't ask for. Dad looked over his glasses but didn't say a word. It was Rhiannon's name that broke the silence, of course. "Do you think this is really the right time?" Mom said, tilting her head just enough to pretend it was concern. "You know Rhiannon's barely keeping it together. All those therapy bills, she hasn't even processed the breakup." I nodded. Of course I did. I always did. I folded my napkin, took a sip of my iced tea, and pretended I wasn't swallowing disappointment. Mom went on, "Maybe just give it a little time, a few months, until your sister's in a better place." So I postponed my engagement announcement. I let them finish dinner, talking about Rhiannon's latest yoga retreat and how she was thinking about starting a candle line. The silence around my news? That wasn't new, but that night, it felt heavier. 8 months later, I got married. I sent out invitations, digital and physical. Daryl and I paid for everything ourselves, and every detail mattered. Not because it had to be perfect, but because it was mine. It was finally mine. On the morning of the wedding, I checked my phone 3 times. No message from Mom, no call from Dad. At 10:42 a.m., a text finally came in. "We're not coming. Rhiannon didn't sleep last night. She's in a fragile state. It wouldn't feel right to leave her alone today." No apology. No excuse beyond that. Just, don't expect us. When I walked down that aisle, I saw every chair filled, except 2 in the front row. No flowers, no ribbons, just the imprint of people who should have been there, but chose not to be. Daryl's mom, Angela, cried through the whole ceremony. She danced with me later when I didn't have a father-daughter moment. She even helped bustle my dress. At the reception, while people buzzed and clinked glasses, a man I barely knew, someone from Dariel's old office, walked up to me and asked, "Your folks get lost on the way here?" I smiled, the kind that stretches tight but doesn't touch your eyes. "No, just lost in their priorities." I excused myself, found the bridal suite, and shut the door. It wasn't until I sat down, alone with the noise muffled behind the wall, that my body finally let go. My hands shook, my throat clenched, but I didn't cry. Not really, just leaked a little grief I'd been holding since that dinner over meatloaf. Later that night, when everyone was drunk or dancing or both, I looked back at those two empty chairs. They stayed untouched the entire evening. Even the caterers asked me if they should remove them. I told them no, let them sit, let them be a monument. I wasn't angry, not yet. I told myself it was fine, that I'd expected too much. But then, while packing up after the reception, I walked over to the gift table. Something felt off. I counted twice. Then again. Envelopes were missing. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the table, like maybe I'd miscounted. Like I could will the envelopes to reappear if I stood still long enough. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. 2 days later, Dariel and I sat at our small dining table, the one with a leg that wobbled slightly no matter how many times he'd tried to fix it. We were sorting through cards and gifts, writing thank you notes with the kind of tired joy only newlyweds understand. But something didn't add up. I thought your Uncle Rob gave us a check, I asked, flipping through a stack of cards. He did. I remember him slipping it in a gold envelope, Dariel said without looking up. Said he wanted us to use it for a honeymoon cabin. I went back through the pile. Nothing gold, nothing from Rob, or Aunt Claudia, or the Myers family. At least 6 envelopes we both remembered had vanished. That's when Dariel said, "Hang on, let me pull the security cam footage from the venue. I think the gift table was in frame." While he worked on that, I scrolled through text messages. One from my mother popped up from the night of the wedding. Short, dismissive. Rhiannon took a few envelopes home to keep them safe. She'll bring them by next week. I hadn't thought much of it then. I was too exhausted, too emotionally spent to read between the lines. But now it tasted sour. Dariel tilted the laptop toward me. "There, see that?" The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Rhiannon, alone at the gift table, looking around before slipping several envelopes into her designer tote bag. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't panicked. She looked like someone cleaning up after a party, like it was her event. "They'll bring them by," I repeated under my breath, then shut my phone off. They never did. Later that week, I stopped by my parents' house to grab a storage bin I'd left in the garage, wedding decor, that hadn't made it to the venue. It was supposed to be a quick in and out. I didn't even take my coat off. But the house was empty, and as I walked through the hallway toward the garage, something pulled me toward the guest room, my old room. I don't know why I opened the closet. I hadn't slept there in years. But there it was, my mom's old jewelry box, the one she used to keep locked, the one she'd scolded me for touching when I was 11. It was unlocked now, sitting on the top shelf like it had been forgotten. I opened it. Inside were a few trinkets, pearls, cufflinks, a tiny gold cross from her first communion. And then, beneath it all, folded neatly, was a pink envelope. The stationery looked expensive, the kind that leaves a faint shimmer under the light. It was a letter, a real one, handwritten, flowing and elegant in a way I didn't know my mother's handwriting could be. To my beautiful Rhiannon. I sat down on the edge of the bed as I read. "You are everything I ever dreamed of in a daughter. Your grace, your beauty, your strength. Watching you walk across that stage at your modeling showcase was one of the proudest moments of my life. I see so much of myself in you, and I know, without a doubt, you are destined for great things." I couldn't breathe. My eyes scanned the rest of the page, looking for context, a date, 3 years ago. It wasn't the words that gutted me. It was knowing they existed at all. I had never received anything like that, not even close. I folded the letter back with care, slid it into its envelope, and returned it to its spot. Then I stood up, walked out, and left the bin behind. I didn't need one more reminder of what they'd chosen not to give me. Outside, the wind had picked up. My car smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet Darielle had tucked under the seat last month. I sat behind the wheel, hands resting at 10 and 2, and stared at the dashboard clock as the numbers flipped forward. For the longest time, I told myself the distance between me and my family was circumstantial, that we'd just fallen out of rhythm, that people change, that I was busy, that they were distracted. But it's funny, when someone stays emotionally absent long enough, you start inventing reasons for them. Not to protect them, to protect yourself. You start building excuses because the idea that they simply chose not to love you the same, that's unbearable. I didn't text my mom that I'd been there. I didn't follow up about the missing envelopes. I didn't mention the footage. I didn't say anything. That night, while Dariel slept with a hand draped over my waist, I lay awake watching the ceiling fan spin. My chest didn't feel heavy. It felt hollow. The next day, I made coffee, checked work emails, and went on like nothing happened. Like I hadn't found written proof that my mother had a favorite child and wasn't even ashamed of it. I didn't say anything, yet, but something inside me was shifting. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was certainty. Maybe there was never meant to be a letter for me. Maybe I was never meant to be in her story at all. I didn't sleep much after that. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. It was quieter than that. A strange stillness, like hearing the echo of your own breath in a house you grew up in that no longer feels like home. 3 mornings later, a package from the photographer arrived. Darielle left it on the kitchen counter before heading to work. "Your photos came," he said casually, not knowing how heavy that sentence would land. I waited until lunchtime. I made myself a sandwich, took 2 bites, pushed the plate aside, and opened the USB drive on my laptop. The first image came up. It wasn't me. It was Rhiannon, in a champagne-colored dress, standing in front of the floral arch I'd chosen. She was smiling, posed like it was her engagement. I clicked through the files. Group shots where Rhiannon was always in the middle, laughing with my bridesmaids, holding the bouquet. The bouquet I paid for. The bouquet I held when I stood alone at the altar without my parents. I scrolled further. No close-up of me during the vows. No shots of Dariel's tears, when I said I'd never known unconditional love until him. Just Rhiannon beaming beside the cake. I called the photographer. Tried to keep my tone light, polite. "Hey, I just got the preview album. Did some shots get left out?" There was a pause, papers rustling. "Oh, I think your mom requested which ones to include for the print draft. She emailed me about it a few days after the wedding." My jaw tightened. "I don't remember that." "Yeah," she said, cheerful, unaware. "The email came from her address. She wanted more of your sister. Said it'd be good for family keepsakes." I thanked her, hung up, and just stared at the laptop screen. Of course. Of course they wanted to remember Rhiannon, because remembering me would mean facing what they chose not to show up for. That weekend, we went to brunch with Dariel's side of the family. I wore a denim jacket and forced myself to smile. Mavis, my aunt from Michigan, sat across from me, sipping her tea. "We were really surprised not to get the final RSVP," she said between bites of toast. "We thought maybe it was a small private ceremony. Didn't want to push." I froze. "Wait, you never got your invite?" She shook her head. "Nope. We got the save the date, but nothing after. Claudia said the same thing." My fingers curled around my mug. "I sent those out myself. I double-checked every name." Mavis shrugged. "Maybe it got lost in the mail?" 3 more people, extended family, brought up the same thing over the next few days. People I knew I'd included. People I had wanted there. Back home, I opened the RSVP dashboard Dariel helped me set up. It let us track who opened, responded, declined. At first glance, everything looked fine. But when I clicked into the back-end log, something only someone with admin access could do, I saw the problem. Dozens of invites had been opened, then deleted. The IP address? Logged under an alternate email labeled rjennings.archive. I recognized the recovery phone number. It was Rhiannon's. No one else had the login credentials, except her. Because Mom had said, "Let your sister help. She's good with planning." I didn't tell Daryl right away. I needed time to process it on my own. Instead, I printed the email logs. I highlighted the timestamps. I took screenshots. Then I emailed them to myself, subject line, "In case I forget." That night, after dinner, Daryl asked me if I wanted to watch a movie. I said I needed a hot bath first. I soaked in silence, eyes closed, head back, the sound of the faucet dripping in slow rhythm. My body felt tired, but my mind was sorting. They didn't forget me. They erased me. They edited me out of my own celebration, like I was an afterthought, like my love story was a footnote in someone else's autobiography. And erasure isn't passive, it's a conscious act. You don't accidentally cut someone from every group photo. You don't unintentionally delete their guests from a list. That's not carelessness. That's cruelty, dressed in politeness, wrapped in silence. So no, I didn't cry. Not then. I just made a new folder on my computer. I named it Truth. I dragged the screenshots in. I started cataloging. Because I wasn't spiraling, I wasn't shrinking, I was preparing. The next week slipped by in fragments, work emails, grocery lists, and a few nights where I thought I might actually forget what they did. I didn't. But for the sake of getting through the day, I played along with normal. Thursday afternoon, I was sorting tax documents at the kitchen table, trying to get everything ready for our accountant. Daryl was at work, and I had the place to myself. Our coffee maker sputtered in the background while I printed off receipts and contracts we'd need to itemize deductions from the wedding. When I opened the venue folder on my laptop, a PDF caught my eye. It had been emailed directly to me by the events manager, marked as finalized copy. I clicked it without thinking. Then I stopped breathing. There it was. The signature line, primary contract holder, Rhiannon Jennings. My fingers hovered above the touchpad. I scrolled back up. Everything looked like it should have, except it didn't. My name was only mentioned once, as the honored guest. The client listed was Rhiannon, her email, her phone number, her name on every line that mattered. I blinked, once, twice, 3 times. I went into my transaction history, pulled up the deposit I'd made in person 6 months ago. Cash. Paid in full. I remembered the visit clearly. I'd taken a half-day off to meet the venue coordinator myself. The next email notification came in 2 hours later. Subject: quick note from Rhiannon Jennings. Hey sis, since I took care of the deposit and contract, it would be great if you could Venmo me your half. $250 should cover it. No rush. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I printed the PDF, added it to the Truth folder, and took a screenshot of the email. Then, I opened the security footage again, Rhiannon at the gift table, casually slipping envelopes into her purse. This wasn't just about attention anymore. This was about money. The following afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house. I had a small package addressed to them, a framed photo from the wedding of Daryl and me. The one picture I had where I still looked like a bride. It felt polite to share it, even though it felt hollow doing so. Mom wasn't home. Dad didn't come to the door, but Letitia, our part-time housekeeper, was outside near the garage, sorting trash bags. I almost waved and left, but something about her face made me pause. "Sedona?" she asked, tucking her gloves into her apron. "You doing okay?" I hesitated. "I'm managing." She stepped a little closer, then lowered her voice. "You didn't hear it from me. But a month before your wedding, I overheard a conversation between your mom and Rhiannon." Letitia glanced back at the door. They were in the kitchen, whispering. Something about keeping the guest list clean and making sure the day didn't turn into a pity parade. I didn't say a word. I just stood there still, while the wind rustled through the trash bags. They talked like it was for your benefit, like you'd be overwhelmed if there were too many people. But then I heard your mom say— She paused, lowered her eyes. We just can't have the wrong child be the center of attention. My stomach turned cold. Letitia met my gaze. I didn't know what to say. I figured it wasn't my place. But you deserve to know. It wasn't a mistake. They planned it. I swallowed hard and nodded. Thank you for telling me. That night, after Daryl went to bed, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself for a long time. Not to judge what I saw, not to cry, just to witness myself. I thought about how many times I'd been asked to shrink, to be flexible, to let things go for the sake of the family. How many times I'd told myself it wasn't that bad, that I was being sensitive, that maybe it really was just miscommunication. But contracts aren't miscommunications. Invoices don't lie. And people don't accidentally assign credit for your life to someone else. I pulled my hair back into a bun, washed my face, brushed my teeth. Then I sat down at my computer and opened a new document. I typed one line at the top. They've turned this into a transaction, so I'll treat it like one. This wasn't a misstep. This was strategy. Control disguised as kindness. Theft dressed in silk. They'd taken my wedding, my story, my name, and they'd handed it to the person they'd always considered the real star of the family. So fine, let them have the spotlight. I was building something quieter, but far more permanent. After saving the PDF and closing the laptop, I didn't go to bed. I couldn't. My hands were steady, but my chest carried a kind of still tension I hadn't felt since the night of the wedding. I walked out to the porch and let the cold air hit me. The street was silent. No cars, no footsteps, just the occasional rustle of wind through bare branches. I stood there for a long while, thinking. When I came back inside, I sat down at the desk again and messaged James, Darielle's cousin. He'd casually mentioned filming parts of the wedding on his DSLR, mostly for fun. He wasn't a professional, but I remembered him being meticulous about camera angles. Hey, I typed, any chance you still have the raw footage from the wedding? He responded within 10 minutes. Yep, I've got everything on a hard drive. You want it? Yes. He dropped it off the next morning on his way to work. No questions asked, just a plastic case with a Post-it on top. Hope it helps. I waited until Daryl left for a site visit before plugging it in. The files were unedited, time-stamped, unpolished. I started with the footage from the ceremony, expecting shaky hands or background noise. What I got was something else entirely. There she was, my mother, arms wide open as she greeted Rhiannon at the venue entrance. A kiss on the cheek, a compliment about her dress. You look radiant, honey. I didn't hear her say that to me. Then Rhiannon, standing next to me as we were getting lined up for photos, tugging at my bouquet. Not your color, really, she whispered with a half-laugh, as if my peach-toned arrangement offended her personal aesthetic. Later, I watched my mom wave the photographer away from a group shot. Let's get one with just Rhiannon and the girls, she said dismissively, as if I was just another person on the periphery. I was standing right there. The last nail was a toast, completely impromptu. Rhiannon had grabbed the mic during the reception, smiled as she thanked everyone for making this a special day for our family. Our family! No mention of me. No acknowledgement that it was my wedding day, that I was the bride. I watched my face in the background. I wasn't smiling, and I wasn't in frame at all for the last 4 minutes of that video. I sat back, arms crossed over my chest, laptop screen casting a cold light onto my face. It wasn't anger that filled me this time. It was confirmation. They didn't just minimize me, they deleted me. On purpose. That afternoon, while heating leftovers in the microwave, a message popped up in my social inbox. Someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Doreen. Back in college, she'd been in a few of my marketing classes. We weren't close, but we'd shared a handful of group projects and mutual eye rolls when Rhiannon visited campus, floating through like she owned the place. The message was short. "Hi, Sedona. I saw your name mentioned on a wedding thread in a forum. I wasn't sure if it was you, but if it is, I just wanted to say something about your sister. Because what happened to you isn't new." I stared at the message, unsure whether to engage, but curiosity won. We messaged for a while. Doreen told me that Rhiannon had dated a guy named Marcus back in college. He'd been planning to propose to his long-term girlfriend. According to Doreen, Rhiannon found out and inserted herself, became the supportive friend to both parties, then started a rumor that the girlfriend was cheating. The engagement ended 3 weeks later. "She told me once," Doreen typed, "that if you delay a woman's ring long enough, you get to wear the crown instead." She attached a screenshot, a text from Rhiannon. "One ring delayed is a crown retained." I didn't need more proof, but I saved it anyway. That night, I created a new folder inside my truth file. I named it Pattern. James's footage went in, Doreen's screenshot, a copy of the venue contract, the RSVP deletion logs, screenshots of Rhiannon at the gift table, every lie they told, every move they made while I was too distracted or too polite to push back. Dariel came home to find me organizing documents on the floor like a puzzle. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I am now." Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about record. They had curated a version of the wedding, of my life, that fit their comfort. I had let them. I had swallowed it all to keep peace. But now, peace looked like truth, even if it was uncomfortable. I opened a blank email, addressed it to a legal contact one of my friends had recommended after her own family lawsuit the year before. I didn't write much, just a subject line, intent to respond. And one sentence. "They've crafted their story for too long. I'm ready to present mine." I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and poured myself a glass of water. The house was quiet. Dariel was in the shower. The night was calm. But I wasn't in hiding anymore. The email was sent. The folder was organized. I had built a wall of proof, brick by digital brick. But still, I didn't expect the knock on the door that came the following Tuesday morning. It was just after 10 a.m. I was still in sweats, folding laundry in the living room, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a man in a gray blazer holding a thick envelope. My stomach tensed. "Sedona Jennings?" he asked. I nodded. "You've been served." He handed me the envelope, turned, and walked away before I even spoke. Back inside, I placed the envelope on the counter and stared at it like it might bite. Dariel came in from the garage a few minutes later and saw me frozen in place. "You okay?" he asked. "Rhiannon's suing me." I said it flat, like I was reading a headline off the news. He didn't ask if I was serious. He just put a hand on my back and waited while I opened it. The allegations were bold: defamation of character, intentional infliction of emotional distress, creating a toxic environment within the family, and at the bottom, her witness list. My mother, Velma. There it was, in black ink, an affidavit signed by the woman who gave birth to me, saying she had observed Sedona's patterns of jealousy and manipulation over the years, and feared the emotional impact her behavior had on Rhiannon's mental health. Dariel read it all, jaw tight, eyes scanning each page like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I didn't cry. I laughed, short, humorless. "She's painting me like some hysterical villain in a movie she directed." I set the envelope aside and pulled out my laptop. "They want a show?" I muttered. "Fine. I'll give them a script with receipts." That night, after dinner, I logged into the bank account Dariel and I had opened for wedding-related expenses. We hadn't touched it in weeks, but something had been bothering me. A vague memory, half-formed and ignored. 3 days before the ceremony, a transfer had been made. $2,000 gone, sent to an account I didn't recognize. Dariel hadn't done it. I certainly hadn't. That left one possibility. I remembered Rhiannon offering to help track the budget early on. She'd convinced me to let her sync the spreadsheets. "You've got so much on your plate already," she'd said, with a practiced smile and false warmth. "Let me take that off your hands." I logged into the admin panel of the finance app we'd used and pulled the IP logs. The same IP address that had accessed and deleted RSVP data. It had authorized that $2,000 transfer. I stared at the screen, rage simmering under my skin like a low flame. $2,000. My money, moved quietly, disguised as a favor, disappeared into whatever void Rhiannon had carved for herself. I documented it all, screenshots, timestamps, internal email alerts. Then I called the bank and flagged the transfer. "Possible unauthorized activity," I said calmly. They opened a case immediately. The next twist came 2 nights later. I was just finishing dishes when my phone rang. Mavis. "Hey, kiddo," she said, her voice unusually sharp. "You have a minute?" "Sure. Everything okay?" "I just left a dinner at your mom's. I'm sorry, I have to tell you something." I walked into the living room, sat down. "Go ahead." She was laughing, telling this story about how dramatic you always were as a kid, called you a walking guilt trip, said, and I quote, "She never grew out of needing to feel wronged." Everyone chuckled. I felt heat rush to my cheeks. "I couldn't just sit there," Mavis continued, "so I recorded it. I didn't mean to, it just happened. I had my phone in my lap. I didn't respond right away." "You want me to send it?" she asked gently. "Please," I said. The audio came through 20 minutes later. My mother's voice, light and airy, like she was discussing a recipe, not her daughter. "You know Sedona," she said with a soft chuckle. "She's been performing since she was 10, always so wounded. If you look at her too long, she'll think you hate her." They all laughed. A few clinks of cutlery. Someone said, "Well, some people just live for the drama." It was all there. Casual, cruel, cozy. I saved the file and emailed it to my attorney with the subject line, Exhibit A, Character. That weekend, Daryl and I drove to the lake to clear our heads. We didn't talk much. He held my hand on the drive, squeezed it when I didn't realize I needed grounding. We walked the trail around the water in silence, our boots crunching on dried leaves. Halfway around the loop, I stopped and looked out across the rippling surface. A family was nearby, tossing bread to ducks, laughing as the wind tangled their scarves. I turned to Daryl and said, "They turned on me." He looked at me. "I know." "But I'm not walking into that courtroom broken," I said. "I'm walking in prepared." He nodded. "And you won't be walking in alone." I smiled, just a little. Back at home, I opened a new folder. Legal. Everything went in. Dated, labeled, ordered. They had drawn the battle lines. They thought they could shame me into silence, use reputation as a weapon, twist concern into manipulation, mask betrayal as protection. But I wasn't asking for approval anymore. I was submitting evidence. I submitted the final folder to my lawyer that Friday. By Monday morning, we were in court. Daryl took off work to sit beside me. He didn't ask if I wanted him there. He just showed up, suit jacket draped over his arm, holding my favorite granola bar like it was armor. I didn't eat it, but I appreciated the gesture. The courtroom wasn't grand. It smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper, like most municipal buildings do. There was no dramatic music, no pounding gavels, just beige walls and straight-backed chairs that made you sit up whether you wanted to or not. Rhiannon entered like she was stepping onto a movie set. She wore a cream blouse buttoned to the collar, a soft gray skirt, and just enough makeup to look like she hadn't tried. Her hair was pulled into a low bun. She looked demure, wounded, saintly. Velma sat behind her, hands folded neatly in her lap, lips pressed into a thin line of maternal concern. When our eyes met, she blinked. That was all. The judge, a man who looked like he'd rather be fishing than settling a family feud, called us to order. The first part of the hearing was Rhiannon's. Her attorney led her gently through the testimony. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue when she described how my baseless accusations had affected her emotionally, how her social media partnerships had pulled back, how she felt unsafe, publicly smeared by someone who was supposed to be family. "I've never wanted anything but peace," she said, voice trembling. "But this campaign against me, it's taken a toll on my mental health and my career." I watched her, wondering if she'd practiced that speech in the mirror. I wondered if Velma had helped her rehearse. When it was my lawyer's turn, he stood slowly, calmly. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to submit Exhibit B." He handed the clerk a printed email chain. "It's a forward from Miss Rhiannon Jennings to her attorney. The subject line reads, quote, 'How to frame this to win.'" The judge raised an eyebrow. The courtroom, until then subdued, rustled with whispers. My lawyer continued, "Within the body of this message, Miss Jennings outlines how she intends to use phrases like emotional distress and defamation strategically, not in response to harm done, but as a tactic to regain control of public perception." Rhiannon's attorney objected on relevance. Overruled. Velma leaned forward, whispering something harsh behind Rhiannon's shoulder. The judge adjusted his glasses and read the email silently for a moment before asking, "Miss Jennings, can you confirm this email is yours?" Rhiannon hesitated. Her throat moved like she'd swallowed glass. I don't remember sending that." "Do you deny it came from your account?" he asked again. She blinked. "No, I don't deny it." That's when things began to shift. My lawyer methodically walked through our timeline. The RSVP tampering the unauthorized money transfer, the gift table footage, the wedding photos she curated, the audio recording from Velma. And now, the email, each one layered like sediment, pressing down on the image Rhiannon had painted. Velma's cousin, who had come just to be polite, stood and quietly exited the gallery. Then Mavis. Then a man I recognized from childhood, my Uncle Alan, who muttered on his way out, "I knew something always felt off about that girl." Rhiannon's composure began to fray. She fumbled through a response about being misunderstood and family dynamics that people on the outside wouldn't understand. But no one was interrupting her now. No one was swooping in to fix it. Darielle leaned closer and whispered, "You haven't said a word, but you've already won the room." I didn't smile, not out of restraint, but because it wasn't joy I felt. It was clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was standing in the truth and refusing to be pulled out of it. The judge called for a short recess. I remained seated while others filed out. I caught a glance from Velma as she passed me. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes looked tired. Tired in the way people get when they realize the script they've followed for years no longer makes sense to the audience. Outside in the hallway, Rhiannon leaned against the wall, checking her phone. I didn't approach her. There was nothing left to say. Back in the courtroom, the judge returned and addressed both parties. "This is not the place to mend family wounds," he began, "but it is the place to determine credibility. And I'm inclined to believe Ms. Jennings has presented a consistent and well-documented account." He didn't deliver a final verdict yet, but his tone left no ambiguity. As we gathered our things, I noticed Velma had left without saying goodbye. It was fine. I didn't need closure from someone still living in a performance. In the parking lot, Darielle opened the car door for me. Before I got in, I looked up at the sky. Clear. Blue. Still. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. We returned to court that Wednesday morning. It was overcast outside, the kind of sky that made everything feel like it was waiting to be decided. Inside the courthouse, the same seats, the same stiff air, the same dull beige walls. But something had shifted. Not in the room, but in me. The judge called my name. I stood. Not because someone had told me to, but because I chose to. He asked if I had anything to say before ruling. My lawyer gave me a small nod. I walked slowly to the front, heart steady, not racing. I didn't bring notes. I didn't practice a speech. I just let the truth rise, sentence by sentence, without needing to dress it up. I was asked to move my wedding for her feelings. I was told it was too soon, too unfair, too complicated for my sister to handle, so I waited. I looked at Rhiannon, but only briefly. Then I was told my wedding didn't matter, that their attendance would be too much for her, that the day I was supposed to be celebrated needed to be quiet, for her sake. I swallowed, but not from nerves, from restraint. Then, when I said nothing, they went further. My guest list was altered. My bank account was tampered with. My gifts disappeared. My photos were edited. My name was left off the contract. And when I finally started asking why, suddenly I was the aggressor. I took a breath. I didn't file this counterclaim to get even. I filed it because, at some point, you have to stop asking for someone else to tell your story right, and start telling it yourself. When I returned to my seat, the room was completely silent. Even Rhiannon looked down at her lap. The judge leaned forward, hands steepled. "I've reviewed the full record," he began. "And while this is clearly a complex family dynamic, there's little ambiguity in the documentation." He turned toward Rhiannon's table. "Miss Jennings, your initial suit is dismissed on grounds of insufficient evidence and demonstrated intent to manipulate the legal process." Then he looked at me. "Ms. Jennings, your counterclaim is accepted. The court recognizes financial loss, reputational harm, and deliberate obstruction. A mediation schedule will be ordered to negotiate terms of restitution." Velma stood up and left the courtroom before the gavel came down. I watched her walk out, shoulders straight, head high, but her pace faster than usual. She didn't look back. I didn't follow her. Rhiannon lingered longer. She packed her purse slowly, as if hoping someone would stop her and say she'd been misunderstood. No one did. Outside the courthouse, it was colder than it looked. Daryl handed me my coat before I asked. Mavis was waiting by the steps, arms crossed over her chest like she'd been holding something in for weeks. She hugged me tightly, whispered, "I'm proud of you," and didn't let go for a long moment. Daryl didn't say anything right away. He just stood beside me, hand on my shoulder, until the weight in my chest finally shifted. "You did what they thought you never would," he said softly. "You said it." I nodded, but I didn't smile. Instead, I exhaled. For the first time, it felt complete. Not fixed, but whole. A quiet knowing that I had stood up and been heard. That evening, after dinner, I went out back and sat on the steps with a cup of tea. The yard was still. No wind, no rustling branches, just space. I watched as the sun dipped below the tree line, soft and gold like a secret that no longer needed to be hidden. I opened my journal, not the one filled with dates and screenshots, a different one I hadn't touched in months. And I wrote, I didn't want to win. I just wanted them to stop pretending I didn't exist. There was no gloating, no hunger for more, just quiet, because the truth had stood up with me, and it had stayed. And the most healing part wasn't that the judge believed me. It was that I believed myself. 2 months passed before I saw her name again. It came in a pale ivory envelope, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery flyer in our Vermont mailbox. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Too perfect to be casual. Too curated to be real. I stood on the porch, boots dusted in dirt from the garden path, Millie sleeping near my feet. I opened the envelope with one hand while holding my coffee in the other. Inside was a wedding invitation. Rhiannon and Daniel join us for a celebration of love, family, and new beginnings. It was printed on embossed cardstock, thick and heavy like money. Gold trim, a blush ribbon. The whole thing screamed image. But no note, no apology, no acknowledgement of what had just taken place in a courtroom 2 months earlier. She'd cried in court. The judge had ruled in my favor. Velma had slipped out before the end. And now here she was, pretending like none of it happened. I walked inside, placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, and took another sip of coffee. Then, I grabbed a black pen from the drawer, wrote "Return to Sender" across the front, and slid it back into the mailbox. That was it. Not because I was angry, because I was finally done waiting. The house Daryl and I bought sat on 3 wooded acres outside Brattleboro. Cedar-sided, white trim, wrap-around porch. It wasn't big, but it was ours. On Sunday mornings, I made pancakes and read on the porch swing while Millie snored beside me. Daryl chopped wood and talked to the birds like they were neighbors. Sometimes I let myself breathe so deeply I forgot what it felt like to hold my breath for years. I planted herbs in the windowsill. I rearranged the books in our living room just for fun. I started painting again. Nothing good, nothing worth framing, but honest strokes on paper that made me feel like I could still create something no one else could erase. There were days I didn't think of them at all. But when I did, it wasn't like before. It didn't ache. It was just information. A distant fact, like remembering an old address or a song you used to play on repeat when you didn't know any better. I found a picture of myself the other week while organizing files on my laptop. Taken at age 11, braces still new, hair frizzy, eyes uncertain. I paused on it longer than I expected to. "You'll make it out," I whispered, looking into those wide eyes. "You'll stop needing their permission to breathe." I never got that letter from my mom, the one Rhiannon had tucked away in her drawer. I never got the dance, the toast, the front row seat filled with people clapping just for me. But I got here, and that's enough. A few nights after the wedding invitation, I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter to Rhiannon. Not to send, to let go. "Dear Rhiannon, you didn't break me. You just showed me where I'd already been cracked. You were never the storm. You were just the weather I had to learn to walk through. I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be. I won't be attending, not out of spite, but because I'm no longer performing in a play I didn't write. I won't be there for the photos, or the speeches, or the perfect narrative, because peace doesn't need to be seen." I folded the paper, walked to the fireplace, lit a match, and watched the flame curl upward, eating the words slowly, line by line. Daryl walked in halfway through and didn't ask questions. He just put a blanket around my shoulders and sat beside me. Later that evening, I added one more line to my journal. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. It means I've stopped rehearsing what I'd say if you gave me a chance. I won't show up, not to your wedding, not to your story. You'll have to write the rest of it without me. Sometimes I think people imagine healing as a finish line, a confetti moment, a banner that says, "You made it." It isn't. It's more like this. Silent mornings, coffee brewed how I like it, the sound of wind chimes, and no need to prove a thing. I don't live in a fantasy of reconciliation. I live in the quiet. And for the first time, it doesn't feel empty. It feels free. She cried in court. I walked away in peace. That's the difference between being seen and being free.